This is part 2 of this series. If you missed any of the previous parts of the series, go back, listen to them because there's lots of trends that you can follow for 2025. Number 4, 2025 is kind of the year of the micro. So we talked about micro communities. This is micro pivoting for aligned growth because what has always happened is often we will be in the same business model for years and it becomes kind of stagnant. But the thing is that things are really changing fast now online. So if you have a business online or you sell online, you need to be continually actually pivoting in order to make sure that your business aligns with your community. Traditionally, when you were ready to pivot, you would flip everything upside down or you'd start over. But now it's more about those small incremental tweaks. It's testing the waters. It's trying new ideas or opportunities while you maintain your core business. It's not overhauling everything overnight. It's adjusting everything a little by little so it aligns with your goals and your vision. When I got into visibility mentorship and a lot more of the business side of my work, I started with first starting this podcast. It's a small adjustment, and then slowly introducing other products. The way that you can slowly introduce a pivot, whether it's because you want to do something totally different or you feel like you are no longer with your thumb on the pulse of what you're doing, you feel like there's something else people need. Spend 10 to 20% of your time experimenting with your pivot. You don't need to completely overhaul everything or throw something new out there. You can just take 10 to 20% of your time, experiment with that pivot. Gradually transition your resources to reflect your new direction. So you're gradually shifting what you talk about in your blog. You're gradually changing your branding. You're gradually changing your website. It doesn't need to be this whole, hey, in 3 months, we're starting a totally new business. No, micro pivot. Something else to think about, especially if you're a solo entrepreneur with the micro pivot, is what can you repurpose in your existing assets? So, for example, what current skills or offerings do you have that you could adapt to a new niche? A photographer, for example, might pivot from weddings to personal branding shoots. Now, that's quite a big pivot, but they can gradually add new clients that show this, maybe have a little blurb on their website about it. It's a gradual pivot into this area. You can also experiment with low risk pilots. So, this is before you commit to a full pivot. Maybe you have an idea. Why don't you get just a little beta program, a little test run of it? You don't even create any content, just the outline, and get a small group to run through it to really tell you what you could do. It will help you refine, engage interest, and give you lots of ideas. Part of this as well, something that I love the idea of is a modular business model. So, this is where you take your products and your services and you can put them into smaller components that can be swapped and moved around. Maybe sometimes I offer these services and sometimes I swap them out seasonally. Maybe at this time of the year, I know people really want marketing coaching, but later on, they really want vision planning for the next year. Being able to swap things in and out is a very helpful skill. You don't have to always put your focus on the same services again and again. You can move stuff around. Lastly, part of having these little micro pivots is from the beginning or starting now, building a scalable brand identity. So think about designing a brand that can grow with you, having a mission that doesn't lock you into something. I spoke about earlier how it's really important to have a micro niche for 2025, but that doesn't mean that your brand needs to be in the micro niche. So you can, for example, be the person that creates, I'm looking at a cactus, you create little mini pots for cactuses for people that use them for inspiration while writing. I mean, that's super specific. But your overall brand might be that it's more about plants, or it might be more about mindfulness or creative writing. I can be more scalable in my brand identity, but also have really micro niche communities and products. Reflective questions to think about. What services or products in your business are the easiest to adjust or to modify? What can you easily kind of fix at the moment? What part of your business or your career do you no longer get excited about, that no longer aligns? That is the one to swap out. That is the one to micro pivot out of. Is there a small change you can test without completely disrupting your current path? Can you test a small idea just to see, to get some feedback? Listen, I am the queen of wanting to throw it out and start something new, and I've done it many times. But this strategy is a lot more sustainable and it really does help you grow. Trend number 5, storytelling and purpose led content is going to be key. You might have already noticed how much there is around storytelling at the moment. By the way, this is why I love podcasting, the ultimate storytelling medium. It's only going to continue to grow. And the reason why that is because people want you to be more relatable, more human. They are overwhelmed by super scammy and overly polished content. And if you can bring in real story, it allows them to connect in a way that doesn't feel like it's just superficial. Example of this would be a mental health coach who maybe instead of just talking about the services she has, she talks about her struggle with anxiety, talks about her clients' stories with anxiety. Maybe she starts a podcast where she interviews other entrepreneurs about their mental health struggles. That is purpose led content. It has a very strong mission besides just selling, and it's also more story led. It is getting you interconnected. It allows you to build your audience. It positions you again as a thought leader, and it just creates a much deeper connection with you. Here are some strategies to think about. Think about 5 challenges that your customers face. 5 pain points they have and the products that you offer. But then go beyond that and think about what are 5 stories you could do to build around each of these. Your stories or client stories, and make it not just about I'm creating this story to sell to you, but I'm creating this story to really engage you. People can tell the difference. They know when you're just following a formula of a story to sell. You need it to be a lot more from the heart and really deeper. Incorporate visual and emotional elements. This is something I talk about when I work with new podcasters. Even though podcasting is largely audio, think about what ways can you bring imagery to what you're saying, because people remember images and they remember emotions, they remember analogies, they remember conversational language much more than just whatever you preach at them. So here are the questions for you to think about. Are you sharing content that reflects what you stand for and what you do? Or are you only producing content that promotes what you sell? What larger impact do you want your content to have beyond just growing your business? We get really stuck in, I want to grow my business, I want to grow my followers, and we kind of forget, is there a bigger impact I can have and what would it be? If you had all the money in the world that you wanted and your business was exactly where you wanted it to be, what would you want to talk about in your business? What is a very important topic for you? Next one, what unpolished real life moments can you share that make your brand feel more human and relatable? A trend that I really like that has been happening towards the end of the year 2024 is people sharing their year with the highs and lows. That's such a relatable way to connect with people, to share that while I had these highs, I also had these lows. It's an amazing way to put yourself out there a little bit more. So, how can you do that as well? Trend number 6. Again, if you know the work I do, this one is not going to be surprising. And it's actually the first thing that I would suggest most people do before starting a podcast. And that is podcast guesting as a business growth hack. Authors have known about this for ages. When they get a book coming out, the first thing they do is get on that podcast circuit. I actually had a conversation recently with a agency owner who told me that their podcast client, or their author client rather, best-selling author, noticed that when they took 6 months off from the podcast circuit, their book sales dropped. This is how powerful podcasting can be for growing your business, but a lot of people never ever do it. Now, I have a program called Pod Boost. It is super easy to do at your own pace that shows you how to get on the right shows, shows you what to do once you're on them, because it is not as simple as just picking from a box and getting on it. There's a lot more into it, but here's why it's so powerful for you. Let's say, for example, you're a graphic designer and you specialize in eco-friendly brands. You get featured on a sustainable podcast and you talk about maybe some brand visuals for sustainable brands. From that, you get client inquiries, you get collabs, you also maybe get another spot again on the show. So, more introduction into their audience, or maybe it positions you for an even bigger podcast. This is how you can grow by being on shows. You don't even need the responsibility of having your own one. What to do this? One, targeted research. You really need to identify podcasts that align with your niche and your audience goals. Not every podcast is a good fit for you, even if you might know the host. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Number two is create a really good pitch. This is something I talk all about on Podboost. How do you pitch someone so they don't feel like you are just sending it to a million people, but you're actually really seeing them and you connect that and you connect deeper with them so they want to respond and not ghost you. And three, offer value. So when you're on an interview, not holding back everything and just saying, hey, it's in my program, giving something can also really help you. So what I would say, if you want to do podcast guesting, definitely get that Podboost program. If you want to try it on your own, this is what you want to start with. One, create a toolkit or a resource specifically for listeners of the podcast you want to be on. So you might have a freebie already, but make sure it aligns specifically with the topics you would talk about on a show. Build a portfolio of podcast appearances. So this is the ladder up strategy. You start with smaller shows, but make sure they have an engaged audience, and then you continue to grow and grow and grow. And lastly, use storytelling. I always say come up with 3 stories you can share on a podcast: your transformation, a client's story, and then something just really relatable. This is going to help you in the beginning with the shows. If you want extra support, Pod Boost, you can find it on the Her First 3 Years website. You can also find it in the show notes here. Now for your reflective questions. What unique expertise or insights can you share as a podcast guest? How can you make your guest appearance memorable and actionable? This is where you think about imagery, analogies, funny stories. Know this before you go on a show. What kind of podcast would give you the best return on your investment of time and effort? Here it is tricky. You really want to think about what ones make sense for me. And it's not always the biggest or the most popular, can often be the smallest. I say this a lot that I have been on many, many shows as a guest, and some of the ones that led to the most clients and the biggest community growth happened to be quite small, but there was a very close relationship between those listeners and the host. This is the end of part 2. You can see part 3 up there now. Listen to it next or whenever you're available to, because you will see even more trends to help you growing in your business. And I will see you in the next one.